She was giggling again. That airy, breathless sound she seemed to reserve for special occasions, never around me. It floated above the music, the clinking of crystal, the low murmur of conversations. I was across the expansive living room, yet the sound cut through the noise, and I knew instantly who was causing such amusement. I found myself fixated on an abstract sculpture in the hall, a bronze figure with wings seemingly made of spoons. I didn't understand it, but staring at it was infinitely easier than watching her feign ignorance of my existence. We had arrived at this lavish party as a unit. In the driveway, her hand was intertwined with mine, her grip firm and reassuring as we greeted the other guests. But once inside, her hand grew cold and she drifted away from me like a helium balloon released into the sky. Her dress, a shimmering silver number with a daringly low neckline and an open back that plunged to the small of her back, ensured that all eyes were on her. Every man turned his head, every woman offered a knowing smile. I, on the other hand, became an extension of the wallpaper. For the first half hour, I was a wanderer, a glass of sparkling cider clutched in my hand, a plastered smile on my face, nodding at snippets of conversations I wasn't a part of. I kept telling myself I was being overly sensitive, that she was simply caught up in the excitement of the evening, that she wasn't intentionally losing me in the throng. I was just struggling to keep pace. Then I spotted her on the terrace. She was leaning against the ornate railing, her ebony hair catching the breeze, her head thrown back in laughter against someone's shoulder. Not just any shoulder. His hand was resting casually on her waist, her fingers buried in the fabric of his impeccably tailored shirt. And there it was again, that infernal giggle. I made my exit, unnoticed. I didn't even finish my cider. I didn't utter a single farewell. I marched past the valet, down the long driveway, turned onto the street, and continued walking as if I had a vital appointment to keep. There was no phone call, no pursuit. A mere 10 minutes later, a curt text message pinged on my phone. Return. No, where are you? No, I apologize. No, please. Just a cold, imperative command. And like a fool, I halted my march. I stared at the screen, and in that moment, I made the most regrettable decision of the night. I turned back. The unspoken truth about retracing your steps is that once you've truly departed, something essential within you remains behind. I followed the same route back to the mansion, but everything seemed different, tainted. The sprawling lawn appeared artificial, excessively manicured. The twinkling fairy lights seemed to flicker with a dying energy. Every step I took toward the imposing front door felt like entering a reality I no longer belonged in. The music now pounded in my ears, or perhaps my nerves were raw and exposed. The door stood slightly ajar, as if they were indifferent to who might wander in. I lingered there for a moment, hoping someone would acknowledge my presence. No one did. I stepped inside, and the oppressive heat hit me like a wave. Sweat, expensive perfume, designer cologne, a heady mix swirling in the air, choking my senses. I didn't immediately see her, but the sound of that laughter, closer this time, guided me. Not hers, his. I followed it like a siren's call, a warning of impending doom. Through the opulent living room, past couples swaying too close and laughing too loudly. I found her in the kitchen, leaning against the granite island, casually sipping a drink that looked suspiciously like the one I had abandoned. He was positioned in front of her, the same man from the terrace, sharp blazer, chiseled jaw. His hands danced as he spoke, exuding confidence. Her eyes sparkled at something he said, words I would never hear. She smiled at him with the kind of affection she used to reserve for me, years ago. I stood just 10 feet away, still invisible. I should have turned and fled, but I remained rooted to the spot, desperately hoping, pleading that she would sense my presence, that she would look up and see me and offer me that old, familiar smile, that she would rush over and apologize, telling me she only texted return because she was at a loss for words. She didn't even stir. I walked past her, like a ghost brushing through a crowd. She didn't register my presence, neither did he. I ended up alone on the patio, separated from whatever intimate moment was unfolding between them by cold, impenetrable glass doors. I gripped the railing, breathing heavily as if I had just completed a marathon. Not from physical exhaustion, but from the crushing realization. I knew too much, saw too clearly. She was no longer mine. 10 minutes passed, perhaps 20. The patio lights flickered intermittently. I sank onto a damp bench that smelled faintly of mildew and stared at the trees swaying behind the fence. I resolved to leave again, to simply walk away, hail a ride, say nothing, let everything crumble. Then the door creaked open. I turned too abruptly. She emerged, her shoes dangling from one hand, her drink in the other. Her eyes met mine, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "You came back," she said, her smile devoid of meaning. Words flooded my mind, cruel words, heartbroken words, truthful words, but all that escaped my lips was, "You texted me." She giggled, taking the seat next to mine, close enough that our shoulders grazed. "I thought you were just being dramatic," she whispered. Dramatic? That's how she perceived this. Puis. I watched my wife flirting with another man as if she were a carefree teenager. I left, and she barely registered it. Now I was being accused of overreacting. "Didn't think you'd actually leave," she added. I remained silent, because I now understood something even worse than being invisible. I was predictable. The silence that stretched between us on that bench was oppressive. I could hear the sounds of the party inside, glasses clinking, someone belting out the lyrics to a song I didn't recognize, a woman laughing too hard. Not her, not Delilah, someone else. It all felt distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. She sat with one leg crossed over the other, still clutching her shoes, sipping the last of her drink as if it weren't 2 a.m, as if this night hadn't already shattered something irreparable within me. I glanced at her wrist. A new bracelet, gold and delicate, adorned it, something I hadn't seen before, probably purchased for this evening, perhaps a gift. "You've been acting off lately," she said suddenly, as if I had initiated the conversation. Even before the party, I turned to her, stunned. She was studying the bottom of her glass as if it contained the answers to all of this. I was at a loss for words. "I've been acting off? You invited me here," I finally managed. "Then you vanished for hours." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She didn't argue. Instead, she offered a practice sigh, the kind one develops after years of marriage, the one that silently conveys, "Not this again." "I didn't realize I needed to babysit you the entire night," she said flatly. Her words struck me like a blow. The audacity, the casual cruelty hidden beneath a veneer of reason. I looked away. Deep down, I think I had always known that this night was simply the culmination of something that had begun long ago. A subtle shift I had sensed but never acknowledged. The way she had stopped waiting up for me. The way her phone always faced down. The way she started getting ready in the bathroom with the door locked. "I just thought maybe you'd want to be near me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't respond, not immediately. She stood up, slowly slid her feet into her shoes, one by one, smoothing the wrinkles from her dress. "We're not teenagers, Milo," she said. "You can't expect me to hold your hand at a grown-up party." No apology, no explanation, just dismissal. She was halfway to the door when she turned back, as if she had remembered I still existed. "Are you coming or not?" The words made me queasy. The phrase echoed in my mind. "Are you coming or not?" As if I were being granted access to a realm I no longer belonged in, as if this weren't our shared existence, but rather her own, and I was merely a tolerated guest. Like a specter, I rose slowly. Every fiber of my being screamed, "Don't follow." But I did. I always did. The house felt different as we walked back inside. Perhaps it was my perception. Perhaps it was the looks we received from the other guests. Not curiosity, not welcome, but something else. Something that suggested they knew or had been told. Delilah walked ahead, never looking back. She made her way to the far end of the living room, where a smaller group had gathered near the bar, standing in a tight semicircle, all focused on a man in the center. Him, Gideon. He was regaling them with a story about a celebrity client, complete with exaggerated gestures and feigned modesty. Everyone was laughing, and when she stepped into the circle, his face lit up as if on cue. That's when it happened. He leaned in, cupped her face in one hand, her face, and whispered something in her ear. She smiled. No, not just smiled. She tilted her head and pressed it into his palm for a fraction of a second, a mere heartbeat, but it was long enough to confirm what my instincts had been screaming all night. She had brought me here not because she wanted to include me, but so she could hide me in plain sight. If I had turned around then and walked out of that house, I doubt anything would have changed. The story would have unfolded without me. The ending was already written. I was just a spectator on the wrong side of the glass, but I didn't leave. I did what I always did. I froze. Delilah remained by Gideon's side as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She laughed too loudly, leaned in too close. Her hand rested on his arm once, maybe twice. I saw her absent-mindedly adjust her strap while he spoke, as if she had suddenly become aware of how her dress fit. I wasn't the only one watching. That was the most unsettling part. Two women next to me exchanged a knowing glance when Gideon touched Delilah's waist again. Not shock, not scandal, but amusement, as if it were an inside joke they had already dissected in hushed tones. And still, I stood there, a man witnessing his own wife's public unveiling. At some point I retreated to the hallway just outside the room, partly to breathe and partly to hide. I leaned against the wall and pulled out my phone. No notifications, just that single word from earlier. Return. I hated how much power that word still held. She had summoned me like a forgotten accessory, and I had obeyed. I felt like I was being trained for something, like she was slowly testing how far she could bend me before I shattered. I heard soft, deliberate footsteps behind me. A quiet, familiar voice followed. She's been like this for weeks. I turned to see a woman I barely recognized. Short brown hair, a navy dress, eyes that suggested she had seen too much. She looked at me the way one looks at a stray dog that has been following the wrong person. "You're Milo, right?" she asked. "Delilah's husband?" I nodded cautiously. "Have we met?" She offered a gentle smile, but it lacked warmth. "I'm Mila. I work with her, sort of. I used to be on Gideon's team." That name again. Gideon. The name had become a weight. "I just thought you should know," she continued, lowering her voice. "You're not delusional. You're just playing catch-up." "What does that mean?" I asked. She tilted her head, carefully choosing her words. "It means that whatever you suspect is happening probably started months ago. He's not subtle, and she's not hiding it as well as she thinks." The hallway seemed to sway, not literally, but it felt as if the ground had shifted slightly. I wanted to ask more, but Mila had already delivered her message. She gave me a soft nod and melted back into the party. I stood there in silence, her words sinking beneath my skin. "You're not delusional. You're just playing catch-up," as if this betrayal had already been processed by everyone but me. I needed to witness it firsthand. So, I walked back toward the room, not boldly, not bravely, but numbly. And I saw it. Not a kiss, not a hug, just a moment. The kind of moment you only share with someone you know intimately. He leaned in, his mouth close to her ear. She smiled and gently tugged at the collar of his shirt to whisper something private. She looked like herself, but more vibrant. I was witnessing a version of her I hadn't seen in over a year, and she wasn't feigning it. That was the most painful realization. Her happiness with him wasn't an act. It was genuine. and I was the invisible man who had brought her there. She finally caught my eye across the room, just for a fleeting second. Her expression remained unchanged. No guilt, no embarrassment. She didn't pull away from him. She simply looked at me as if I were standing in the wrong place. And for the first time in our entire marriage, I agreed. I have no recollection of the rest of the night in sequence. Moments blurred together, faces blurred, time stretched. I know I left before she did. That much I remember. I couldn't bear to watch it any longer. The way they moved around each other as if it were only a matter of time before the lights dimmed and they abandoned all pretense. I slipped out just before midnight. She didn't follow. She didn't even text. The house was shrouded in darkness when she returned. I was lying on the sofa, pretending to be asleep. I heard the slow, deliberate click of her heels on the hardwood floor, followed by the soft thud as she dropped her bag by the door. She didn't utter a word, no explanation, no questions. She simply walked to the bedroom, and the door clicked shut behind her like punctuation. The next morning she acted as if nothing had transpired, as if we hadn't shared a party and lost each other within it. She made coffee, hummed a song I didn't recognize, and scrolled through her phone at the kitchen counter. I studied her from across the room, not with anger, but with confusion. She resembled my wife, moved like her, but something was missing. A subtle shift in the way she avoided eye contact, the way she locked her screen every time she set her phone down, the way she chuckled to herself as if she were engaged in a private conversation I wasn't privy to. I couldn't continue with the charade. That night, while she showered, I did something I never imagined I would do. I checked her phone. I didn't know the password, but I didn't need it. The screen lit up with a preview of a text message. "I wish you stayed longer. You looked incredible." No name, just the message. And what devastated me wasn't the content of the message itself, but the fact that she smiled when it arrived. I watched her through the partially open door. She was drying her hair, humming that same unfamiliar tune. And when the message illuminated the screen again, she smiled. She didn't realize I was watching. Later that night, I sat in the darkened garage, simply listening to the house breathe. Have you ever done that? Just sat in your own home, waiting for something to feel right again, but nothing does? I stared at the washing machine as if it might offer some guidance. It didn't. It just sat there, useless and silent, like me. I considered confronting her, shouting, demanding answers, but the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of what she might confess, or worse, what she might deny. Because sometimes denial is more insulting than the truth. Denial makes you question your own sanity, as if you're the one distorting reality. I needed proof, tangible proof, not just furtive glances and gut feelings. So the next day, when she announced that she was heading to yoga with Adrian, I followed her. Not immediately. I gave her a 10-minute head start. Then I grabbed my keys, slipped out the back door, and drove around until I spotted her car parked 2 neighborhoods over, outside a quaint establishment I didn't recognize. It wasn't a yoga studio, it was a boutique hotel. My chest constricted. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I told myself, perhaps she was meeting someone for work. Perhaps she had a surprise planned. Perhaps this could still be salvaged. But then I saw him. Gideon. He pulled into the lot 5 minutes later, got out, looked around, not with apprehension, but with confidence, as if this weren't a novel experience, as if he didn't expect to be seen. He walked directly through the front entrance. 2 minutes later, she followed him inside, and I sat there in my car, gripping the steering wheel, feeling as if the entire world had been tilted without warning. They didn't emerge for over an hour. When she returned to her car, she appeared relaxed, serene, like someone who had just gotten away with something. She checked her phone again, smiled again, and drove out of the lot. That night, when she came home, I asked her how yoga had been. She replied that it was challenging, but invigorating. She launched into a detailed description of the stretches and the music and how the instructor had altered the playlist mid-session. She described poses with names I couldn't even pronounce. It was rehearsed, perfectly rehearsed. And I realized then that I wasn't married to someone who was merely lying to me, but to someone who was fluent in it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay beside her, listening to her slow, even breathing, almost as rehearsed as the rest of her. I turned toward the window, away from her sleeping form beneath the covers, and stared into the darkness until it no longer felt like night, but simply like nothingness. The next morning she left early, claiming she had client calls downtown. I nodded. I kissed her forehead. She smiled as if we were a normal couple. The moment she was gone, I grabbed her spare key and drove back to the hotel. I don't know what I expected to accomplish. I didn't have a plan. Perhaps I simply wanted to see it, to stand where she had stood, to touch the walls of the lie. Perhaps a part of me hoped she would still be there, and everything would finally erupt into the open. No more pretense. But she wasn't. The woman at the front desk didn't even bat an eye when I uttered her name. "Yes, Mrs. Quell checked in yesterday afternoon. She's not currently in the room. Would you like to leave a message?" "Mrs. Quell?" She was using her maiden name. I almost laughed. I informed the woman that I needed to retrieve something I had left in her room, a charger. She barely blinked, handing me a temporary key card, as if I were just another insignificant detail in an otherwise forgettable day. I stepped into the elevator and felt as if I were floating into a version of my life that didn't belong to me. Room 407. I hesitated outside for a moment, key card in hand, my heart pounding as if I were about to commit a crime. I swiped the card. The light turned green. The room smelled of citrus and clean linen, the kind of cleanliness that masks what transpired just hours before. The bed was made too perfectly. The hotel staff had already swept through and sanitized the aftermath, but I could still sense it. Her shoes by the chair, a crumpled water bottle on the nightstand, a charger plugged into the wall that wasn't ours. Then I noticed the receipt folded on the desk beside a nearly empty coffee cup, a printed checkout slip, 2 lattes, 1 breakfast, 1 room, 2 guests. Under special requests, I saw her handwriting. I recognized her distinctive lowercase r, which resembled a half-broken N. It said, "Extra towels, champagne bucket, no housekeeping before noon." I stood there, reading that line over and over again, as if it were some ancient code. I didn't touch anything. I didn't even sit down. I simply stood there, allowing the room to breathe around me. The quiet made it worse. The silence in that space screamed louder than any argument we had ever had. Then I noticed that the bathroom door was slightly ajar. I don't know why I ventured inside. Perhaps I hoped to find something she had overlooked. A forgotten earring, a lipstick shade she couldn't explain, something I could hold in my hand like a weapon. But I found something else. On the marble counter, tucked behind the tissue box, was her phone charger. Not just any charger, but my charger, one I had marked with a small piece of tape near the tip years ago because she was always borrowing it. She had used it in the hotel. She had packed it from home. She wasn't hiding the affair anymore. She was borrowing from our life to power her new one. I didn't cry, not then. I thought I might, but instead I simply stood there, my heart racing, my breathing shallow, staring at a phone charger as if it were proof of something I didn't want to acknowledge. I left the room without touching anything else. I drove home with the windows down. Even though it was cold, I wanted the air to erase the scent, to scrape it off me. When she returned home that evening, she kissed me on the cheek, commented on the terrible traffic, mentioned that she had to reschedule her 3 p.m. client meeting, and complained about the new intern who kept printing everything in color. And I stood. There, my hands in my pockets, nodding like a man who still needed confirmation. But the truth was, I already had it. It wasn't just the text message, or the way she smiled at her phone, or the long showers and late nights and perfume she never used to wear. It was the way she had repurposed the ordinary, the charger, the coffee, the towels. She had dragged pieces of our life into another man's world and smiled while doing it. That night, after she had fallen asleep, I didn't simply lie in bed. I picked up my phone, opened the Notes app, and for the first time since this had begun, I began to document everything I remembered, every excuse, every change in routine, every moment I had ignored. I wasn't going to confront her yet. I wasn't ready for that, but I was ready to stop pretending I didn't see it. The note on my phone continued to grow, line by line, memory by memory. Things I had dismissed returned with brutal clarity. Her sudden need for privacy, the weekend getaways with the girls that never yielded any photos, the way she always showered the moment she walked through the door. The receipts, the phone calls, the music playlists I didn't recognize suddenly blasted through her headphones as if they were the soundtrack to another life. I didn't confront her, not yet. Confrontation is for those who believe they can still repair something. I didn't want to fix it. I wanted to understand it, and then perhaps undo her, not with rage, not with shouting, but with a truth so sharp it couldn't be softened. That opportunity arose sooner than I anticipated. 2 days later, she invited me to another event, not a party this time, but a work dinner. A small gathering, she said. Her boss would be there, a few clients, nothing extravagant. "It would mean a lot to me if you came," she told me, touching my shoulder as if she were attempting to remind herself how to be affectionate. I almost declined, but something within me itched. This wasn't a dinner. It was another performance. I could sense it. She wanted me there for a reason, and I was determined to uncover it. We arrived separately. She claimed it would appear more professional if we didn't arrive together. I played along. The dinner was being held at a downtown rooftop restaurant. You know the type. Glass railings, hanging lights, a staff that spoke in hushed tones. I wore the same blazer I had worn to the first party. It felt tighter this time, even though I hadn't gained any weight. When I arrived, she was already seated at the far end of the long table, laughing, always laughing, with that same radiant energy she used to reserve exclusively for me. Gideon sat beside her. Of course he did. As I approached, she glanced at me and offered a forced smile. No wave, no warmth, just an acknowledgement that I existed and was in the correct location. I took a seat halfway down the table, close enough to hear the conversations, but far enough removed to not be an active participant. As the dinner progressed, I noticed how effortlessly she transformed depending on whom she was addressing. She became a different person. With her client, she was sharp and concise. With Gideon, soft and playful. When she glanced in my direction at all, she was neutral, polite, distant. After the entrees were served, I excused myself to the restroom, and that's when it happened. I didn't intend to see it. I passed behind her chair on my way out, and her phone illuminated on the table. It was angled just enough for me to catch a glimpse of the screen. A text message. "He's here. This might be fun." Sent to Gideon, not received. Sent. My knees nearly buckled. I remained in the restroom for what felt like 20 minutes, not thinking, simply existing, staring at my reflection in the mirror like a character I hadn't authored. When I returned to the table, they were laughing again, louder now. His hand was brushing against her shoulder, as if he were testing how much further he could push the boundaries. And she allowed it. She didn't flinch. Not once. I didn't consume another bite. I watched her. Every word, every look, every furtive glance across the table that never landed on me. I left before dessert. I didn't inform her. I didn't wave. I simply stood up, nodded politely to someone, and disappeared. That night, she texted me just 2 words. "You okay?" I didn't respond. Instead, I stared at the draft of a message I had composed on my phone, but couldn't bring myself to send. I saw what you wrote to him. I didn't send it, because she would deny it. She would dismiss it as a joke, tell me I had misunderstood. And the worst part was, perhaps I would pretend to believe her, just to prevent our world from crumbling around us. So I did something else. I captured a screenshot of that message. I saved it, her words, not for vengeance, not yet, but because I needed a record, something I could grasp when she inevitably began rewriting the truth. And she would. That was inevitable. I awoke early the next morning, earlier than I had in weeks. It was still dark, that liminal hour when the world feels suspended, as if nothing new has commenced and nothing old can inflict harm. I sat in the kitchen with a mug of coffee I barely touched, listening to the silence that used to make me uncomfortable. But today, it felt as if something had finally ceased shifting within me. She was still asleep, serene, wrapped in sheets she had once insisted we purchase together during a spontaneous weekend getaway. They used to hold meaning. Everything used to hold meaning. Now, it was all just stuff, memories stapled to objects that no longer retained their original form. I didn't want to argue with her. I didn't want some dramatic eruption. She would lie, I would spiral, and we would both end up saying things we couldn't take back. I didn't want that version of our ending, not after everything, not even after Gideon. So instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I chose myself. I packed a single bag containing only the essentials, a few articles of clothing, my camera, my sketch pad, the charger that had started it all. I left my ring on the nightstand next to her phone, along with a note, not a letter, just a sentence. I see you now, and I'm finally walking away. Batten. I didn't wait for her to awaken. I didn't linger in the doorway or cast one final glance at the life we had built. It was already gone. I stepped outside, locked the door behind me, and walked to my car with a strange sense of peace I never thought I would experience again. The world outside was muted and gray, like an unfinished painting. I didn't know where I was going, and for the first time, that felt like freedom. 3 weeks have passed since I left. I haven't responded to her messages. I haven't answered her calls. She sent one lengthy email that I couldn't bring myself to read in its entirety. I don't hate her. I simply don't want to have to explain to someone why they broke me. If they can't see it, then it doesn't matter. I'm living in a small cabin now, a few hours north of the city. It's quiet here. There's a creek nearby. I sketch again. I cook for one and don't feel the need to apologize for it. I've reconnected with old friends. I read books without constantly checking the time. I don't check my phone as obsessively as I used to, hoping for apologies that never come, or for lies I would half-heartedly believe just to prevent things from unraveling. Last night I stood outside and watched the sky turn orange above the trees. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. Not the version of me who was desperately seeking attention, not the one who waited for texts that said, "Return, just me." And it turns out, that's enough.